I would just as soon wrap it up now.
Right.
Really. And I feel this presentation I have to make is all right. So I'll move it along. It'll be quick. And I want to preface my remarks by reiterating a point that Oliver made that I've been making all along within our own CAPA board, frankly, and with many other people. There's not going to be a prize-winning event down the road, if we ever reach that point, in which gold, bronze, silver, and other medals will be bestowed to the individual or particular group that comes closest to the true scenario that occurred leading into and then on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, and everything that happened thereafter to the present time.
Amen.
Everything from Parkland on to Bethesda, et cetera, et cetera. Not going to be any awards. So this sense sometimes of competition amongst us, sometimes these feelings of anger, of resentment against other people who are among the Warren Commission critic research community because they have different theories, different ideas, different areas of emphasis, and indeed maybe differences of a historical nature. What the hell difference does that make? It seems to me what we're all looking for is a reopening and investigation of this case to show that's what it's about. Please keep that in mind. And it's also then a good set of remarks to lead into my presentation. Let me finish with this and then take some questions and comments. And I'm going to talk to you now more as a forensic pathologist who has been doing, well, I started my forensic pathology training 61, 62. So the finished product is 62 with a law degree to the present time, 38 and 19, 57 years. 57 years. I've done 21,000 autopsies. I've reviewed about 41,000 others, supervised, reviewed them, okay? There are differences of opinion, obviously. Even pathology is not hard science. I'm going to speak to you now with what is there from a forensic pathological standpoint of a medical nature. There are people who have different thoughts about the circumstances involving these deaths, and I understand that and I appreciate it, and I'll express those thoughts in those particular instances in which one can engage in some kind of speculation, some kind of conjecture. But you have to deal with things not with absolute certainty. I never testify with absolute certainty. I despise that, and I feel that it is inappropriate and, in a technical sense, wrong. And attorneys should object to that if they have an expert on the other side expressing opinions. You testify with a, quote, reasonable degree of medical certainty, or, quote, a reasonable degree or reasonable probability of forensic scientific certainty, whatever the field may be. Just keep that in mind. There aren't many things, there's nothing in science which is an absolute certainty except DNA. DNA is the only thing, and that's cellular DNA, not even mitochondrial DNA. So do keep that in mind. All right, with those comments then, let us proceed to look at the cases of the ancillary, I can use this, figure related to the Kennedy assassination. Ben, where was that circle that I pressed? Oh, the arrow? Which? Oh, this one here? Okay, all right, fine. Okay, all right. All right. The death of Lee Harvey Oswald. So what I've done in these cases, and we'll move quickly, I'm not going to read everything to you, as some people like to do when they put something up on the PowerPoint. So you see the identity, the association, the age, and then the date and place of death, and the circumstances of the death, and the official cause and manner of death. As you know, when coroners and medical examiners do autopsies, when they have jurisdiction in a case, not only do they have to put down the cause of death, A due to B to C, but also on their death certificates, unlike the death certificates made out by your family doctor or in a hospital where there is no manner of death, on the ME coroner's death certificates, you have your choice and you have to fill it out. Natural, accident, suicide, homicide, undetermined, or if you choose the word pending, which is the way Jeffrey Epstein's death was signed out on Sunday, August 10th, by the forensic pathologist who did the autopsy, pending, to be changed 4 days later by the chief medical examiner, Barbara Sampson, who never saw the body and wasn't there at all on August 10th when the autopsy was performed. But I won't digress into Epstein. There will be more programs coming out on that. But I want you to understand about there is that fifth manner of death, and that is undetermined when you're not sure. And when you're waiting for things, the proper term is pending. Pending receipt of information. Undetermined, you can't be sure. The guy with CO in the car with no attachment to a pipe, no notes of suicide. This one tells you that he would drink and he was pissed off and he was going to commit suicide because he hated his wife and he was losing his job. The other guy tells you he couldn't wait to get out of that job and get rid of his wife, and he was delighted to go fishing. So where the hell are you? That's where you put down undetermined. Get the idea? Okay. So let's move on here. Here are the autopsy findings. I'm not going to repeat them except to say they are very, very significant. Very significant. I do want to make a comment about the two comments. Number one, you know who did this autopsy? The guy who should have done the autopsy on JFK, Earl Rose. When I was in the Air Force, and damn it, I didn't have bad arches like our president. I served my 2 years in the Air Force. My chief, a wonderful guy, who became director of the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology later on, knowing of my plans to go into forensic pathology, told me about the forensic pathology 3-day symposiums in DC. And twice in the 2 years that I served, I went there and I met Earl Rose. He was at a different air base, but we met and became friends. He was serving the same time. It was he who was there at Parkland Hospital to assume jurisdiction in the JFK case. It was he who was pushed up against the wall and threatened and swore profanity, hands on guns, and who continued to chase them out into the driveway. So Earl Rose did the autopsy. The findings are here. Another observation, I was reminded of it when I saw one or two of the speakers showing Ruby shooting today. Think about this. When that presentation was made by the Judge Birmingham, a wonderful man, about Ruby and how was it premeditated? Was it set up? How did he get in there and so on? Have you thought about this? I just look at the position. That mafioso runt, he knew where to stand and he knew where to shoot. On the left side, coming in, and in the lower thoracic, upper abdominal area, catching the heart, catching the spleen, catching the aorta. I mean, he knew where to stand. I don't think Jack Ruby ever took an anatomy course. I don't believe so. But goddamn, he knew where to stand and he knew where to shoot. Because even with a head wound, you don't know. You might miss. You might not produce a fatal wound. A good neurosurgeon gets in there, controls the subdural bleeding, takes care of the damaged brain. Think about that. So, what are the theories there? Some people say that he was given a fatal injection of air. Yeah, to me, it's so totally absurd. Number one, Earl Rose would have picked up an air embolism. Number two, this guy, man, Harvey Oswald, the damage that he's got, the heart, the bilateral hemothorax, the whole business, there's no way in the world that anybody had to do anything. Now, there was one comment made when I gave this presentation yesterday to another conference, which was interesting, and I hadn't heard that before. A fourth-year medical student, I believe, was with him in the ambulance and kept pushing down on his chest to try to resuscitate him. That could have led to an air embolism because you've got the open vessels and you keep pushing down, the air could go in. So you see, it's very interesting how there could have been an air embolism on top of everything else, and these injuries were fatal. They were irreversible. He was unsalvageable. All right, so that's Oswald. Now let's move on to Ruby, and we've heard a lot about Jack Ruby. His identity, place of death, and circumstances, and then the official cause and manner of death. Pulmonary emboli, secondary to bronchiolar carcinoma. An embolism is a blood clot that travels to the pulmonary artery from somewhere else in the body. A thrombus is a blood clot that is formed and found where it is. In men, 90-95% come from the legs, and the rest from the periprostatic plexus and so on. In women, it's probably about 70 from the legs, 30% from the internal reproductive organs and so on. So he had those emboli in addition to his cancer. What were the autopsy findings? He had an adenocarcinoma of the lungs. That's not the kind that is associated with smoking. That kind is bronchogenic, but I'm not going to get into those details, but it's a carcinoma. But notice the metastases, the spread to the lymph nodes, the liver, and the brain, and the ribs, and the vertebra, and the pancreas. And then the pulmonary arteries have the emboli. The clot comes up from the legs, comes up through the venous system, goes into the right side of the heart, and then on its way out through the pulmonary artery to the lungs to give up CO2 and pick up oxygen, it gets stuck, and that's a pulmonary embolism. And if it's large, it's sudden, unexpected death, and unlike a heart attack, where you have some chance of being resuscitated, you have a large pulmonary embolism, and one that straddles the saddle embolism into both branches, you can forget about it, you are going to die. He had all of these things. So what are the theories about Ruby? That he was exposed to diagnostic x-rays excessively, and that is what led to the cancer. That he was injected with cancer cells because cancer cells of pancreatic origin were found there. I do not accept that. I haven't seen the slides, but I read the autopsy report, and it came from a very qualified pathologist, and there's just no basis, in my opinion, for that. Now, however, is it possible to expose someone to radiation excessively to produce a cancer? Yes, it is possible. Is it possible to, by way of immobilization and even some medications, to catalyze the development of thrombi in the legs, in the calves behind the knee, that can lead to a pulmonary embolism? Sure, these things are possible. So if anybody wants to think that this was done and somebody planned it, then I can't tell you that it is impossible. I can only tell you that there is a real sufficient cause of death. One of the things, though, that I raise a question about is how long ago was it that Ruby knew about his cancer? Did he know about his cancer when he got a call? And according to John Curington, those of you who are here today, and John Curington got a call from his boss, Mr. H.L. Hunt, asking him to get in touch with Joe Savino and have him come to H.L. Hunt's home, some 15 miles out of Dallas, about 1 o'clock in the morning on Saturday night after the shooting. And then the next morning, we have Jack Ruby, with a mafioso background in there, getting rid of Lee Harvey Oswald. In addition to getting instructions from the big shots, the mafioso bosses, that would be enough, but could also have been in addition to playing to his emotions and, hey, Jack, man, you're going to be a goddamn hero. You killing the guy that killed the president, and playing on his, was there any truth to he felt sorry for Mrs. Kennedy having to endure an upcoming trial? These are all possibilities. And is it possible that he knew about cancer? I tried to get in touch recently with the widow of a doctor. I was given this information, who went and visited him at the jail and kind of gave him some medical care, I don't know what. And I was told, and this is a very straightforward, no BS person, that Ruby spoke to that doctor in Yiddish. So I contacted, I tried to contact by phone and email and writing the widow of the doctor, and unfortunately I've gotten no response. That's something to think about. But anyway, that's the forensic pathological picture of Ruby. Then we have Dorothy Kilgallen. Fascinating. And I was reminded of that by one of the presentations today, showing, as the judge said, he never had seen anything like that. I've never seen anything like it, with the news media coming in when there was a break in the session, and they're all over Jack Ruby. Did you see that? Fantastic. I've never seen that in the courtroom. And among them, I'm not in that picture, I don't think, but among them was Dorothy Kilgallen. To my knowledge, she never really had a personal, private interview with Ruby. She sought it from Belli, but her time was limited, and her interviews, if I may call them that, as she did, were of very, very short, quite brief. But she tried. And I was thinking of Mel Belli there when I was just getting started in the medical legal field, and I began to go to the plaintiffs' trial lawyers conventions, and I remember meeting him, and I had some cases in consultation with him. I remember being invited to his beautiful office penthouse above, as we were told earlier today from the roof, a cannon would be shot when he got in a huge verdict. He was primarily personal injury, malpractice and so on, but he did criminal cases too. A brilliant man, good looking, some weight loss. He could have been a Hollywood, he was and anyway, when I remember going into the bathroom, and there was this, looked to me like a little place to wash dirty towels. And what the hell is that? And above it, it said, res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. It was a bidet. I had never seen a bidet in my life. And that's what it was, res ipsa loquitur. So here back to Kilgallen. What a brave, courageous, strong woman she was, and she undoubtedly was one of the top reporters in the country. She covered, I remember the Sam Shepard case, which I became involved in later, and other cases, and she was found then at her home. She would go out every night late, and they had their little, like the Algonquin table at the nightclubs, and sit around, and a five-story townhouse then, and she was found by her hairdresser who came by the house. And there she was, and the official ruling was acute ethanol, booze, alcohol, and barbiturates. One of the barbiturates at that time, interestingly, is no longer around, called Tuinal. It's a play on words. Tuinal, spelled Tuinal, from two in all. They mixed two things, secobarbital and Nembutal. That's not around Tuinal anymore. But she had these drugs legitimately prescribed. She was into booze and she was into drugs, and that's a deadly combination. Now, the autopsy was done at the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. These are guys that I knew. These were my colleagues. These were my contemporaries, and I had discussed this case with them back years. Jim Luke was the guy in charge. Michael Bodden was the third guy. I was the second guy, and then there's a third one, Bill Cerner. Michael went on to become chief ME of New York City for a while, as you know. Bill Cerner became chief medical examiner in Rhode Island, and Jim Luke, I think, in the Midwest. I mean, these were sharp guys. And these were their findings. The blood alcohol was 0.15, not very high, but it's significant. It would require, over a period of time, depending on how long you're spending drinking, at least 6 1-ounce shots, or 4 to 6 ounce glasses of wine, or 7 bottles of beer. And she did not drink beer. And the barbiturate level, which was illegible in the official autopsy report, was 2.4 milligrams per liter, that was high. So this is a cause of death that we see accidentally, a combination of 2 central nervous system depressants, alcohol and barbiturates. Not the kinds of drug deaths that we are encountering today with fentanyl and heroin and all the opioids, oxycodone and hydromorphone and methadone and so on. But the more typical classical accidental death, not likely the kind of thing with a suicide. So what are the thoughts there? People say she was murdered by an associate of Carlos Marcello to quash her investigation of the JFK assassination. She had stated that she was going to break that case. Some people will probably remember the exact words. She had said that she had gotten information from Ruby, and I don't remember the exact words, but she was going to get the case solved. Mark Shaw, I've had an ongoing relationship with Mark by mail. He's done a tremendous job, 2 excellent books. I recommend them. The Reporter Who Knew Too Much and Denial of Justice. Mark Shaw has done a tremendous amount of work. He, by the way, is giving a big talk in Dublin, Ireland, I think just last night, to a huge crowd. He's not here with us this weekend. So, is it possible that she was murdered? Mark wants to get the body exhumed. I told him I'll do the autopsy. I don't know what it's going to reveal. I doubt it would reveal anything, but I don't think he's going to get anywhere with that in the absence of the family's joinder on that petition to the court. Could somebody have forced these things down her throat while she was inebriated? It's possible. She had no bruises, no marks, no defensive wounds, so there was no struggle. Could she have been under the influence of ethanol and maybe some barbiturates? I don't know. People sometimes forget when they've taken their hypnotic, their sedative, and they take it again, they become confused. We have that issue with Marilyn Monroe on the manner of death. Was it an accident? Was it a homicide? Was it a suicide? Very interesting. I'm not going to digress into that, say that for another day, but that's the same kind of an issue, and you have to think about that. So here again, I do not close the door on the possibility of somebody being there. I have no way of knowing, except I would say it's not so easy to get 15, I don't know if I said that it would have taken about 15 to 20 capsules to have gotten that blood level, 15 to 20 capsules. So to have gotten them down her throat, and there was no damage to her mouth, no damage to her trachea, no damage to her oropharynx. So it was not something that was done with a force required of a conscious person. Doors open. David Ferry. I'll never forget Oliver. You invited me down. He called me, and we had never met, and asked me if I would come down and review the script or whatever. And there was just, I think, one change that I made. They had 161 grams instead of 161 grains for the initial weight of the bullet, for which I got no bonus, Oliver. I know no bonus on that. But I'll never forget, I came in, and I was very, very shy, relatively speaking. And I came into the door, and Oliver pulled me over to the door. And in there, they were shooting the scene at the old courthouse there, or Bourbon Street or World Street, whatever, down in Nolens. It's not New Orleans, Oliver, it's Nolens. And there sat Kevin Costner and David Ferry. They were laughing their ass off. Oliver had to shoot it, I think, 4 or 5 times at least. And that was Kevin Costner, Jim Garrison, talking to Joe Pesci, David Ferry. What were you doing in Dallas that weekend? And the answer was duck hunting, right? And every time Pesci would say duck hunting, they would burst out in laughter. They knew how goddamn ridiculous it was, duck hunting. Pardon me? Yeah, smart bunch of geese, yeah. And I'll never forget, so Oliver, then when they broke, and he called him over to introduce me, and before I could tell Kevin Costner that my wife was in love with him, he said to me, "Oh, you're that guy that's written that stuff about JFK." I felt highly honored. It was a wonderful experience, Oliver. Thank you, and thank you for the beginning of our long-time friendship. So, Ferry, and by the way, Joe Pesci, De Niro and De Niro and CAPA pulled him out of retirement. He's in the movie, which I look forward to seeing next week on Netflix, the 3.5-hour movie, The Irishman. Joe Pesci is in The Irishman. So back to Ferry. The background, pilot, FBI agent, Bannister, date and place of death, circumstances. A fascinating character, and then of course with the eyebrows, etc. So the official cause of death was cerebral hemorrhage due to ruptured aneurysm, and here it is. This was done by the Nolens coroner's office. At that time, the coroner was Nick Chetta, an MD, but not a pathologist. The autopsy was done by one of his pathologists. Now, a berry aneurysm, and it has that name because the aneurysm, a weakening of a vascular wall leading to an outpouching, and somebody thought on the wind that it looks like a little berry. So that's what it's saying. It has nothing to do with berries. You can continue to eat berries. You won't get an aneurysm from eating berries. And you have these blood vessels in the base of the brain. The vessels come up from the vertebral column into the artery, the basal artery, and then they branch off underneath the surface of the brain, and that's called the circle of Willis. And that's where usually the aneurysms are found. Now, when that ruptures, you may have a chance to live if you get a good neurosurgeon, like my son Ben's brother, my son Dan, come to Pittsburgh with your next berry aneurysm, and Danny will operate on you and save your life. He did have hypertensive cardiovascular disease. Now, those were days before there were CAT scans, MRIs, and so on. So there's no way that someone could have detected a berry aneurysm. Regular x-rays do not show a small berry aneurysm. They do not show it. If it ruptures, then you get some idea of a bleed. The point I'm making is that this could not have been manufactured, and someone could not have known that he had a berry aneurysm. But he did have thyroid disease, and he could have taken a large number of the Synthroid tablets. That is possible. And someone who is hypertensive is particularly susceptible then to a lot of thyroid medication, which is going to lead to tachycardia, rapid heartbeat, and then cardiac arrhythmia, and ventricular fibrillation, cardiorespiratory arrest, and, of course, if you do have that aneurysm there, the increased blood pressure and the increased rapid, strong heartbeat definitely can blow it out. There's no question. But there's no way that anybody could have known that he had a berry aneurysm. Could it have occurred? I don't know. Did someone make him take the thyroid medications? Because you can die from that without a berry aneurysm. You can die from excessive thyroid medication leading to cardiac arrhythmia and death. And there are the theories. Suicide due to despondency, allegations. Was he murdered? If so, how was he murdered? Some people raise questions about the absence of hemorrhages referred to, the thyroid size, which is nothing wrong with that size. Why weren't his stomach contents tested for drugs? Why was he naked in bed? These are some thoughts that people have raised. So these are matters I can't comment on. I no expertise about his eyebrows and packaging of the belongings, etc. But the point I'm making is that there is a very legitimate, documented cause of death, and nothing more was required to lead to that ruptured berry aneurysm. I lost one of my closest friends, a doctor, lawyer, colonel in the Army. We were very close, and 60 years old, and Jim Zimmerly died of a ruptured berry aneurysm. It happens. Mary Sherman, fascinating. Director of the Oxner Medical Foundation, again down in Nolens, and alleged associate of David Ferry. I've never really grasped the entire story there. I'll leave it to other people in the hallway afterwards to tell me more about that. Ferry and Oswald and Ruby, talking about Ruby and Oswald. Beverly, am I permitted to say what you told me as we sat there, keeping each other warm at the Dealey Plaza, about what you saw with Ruby and Oswald?
Oh, at the club?
Am I?
At the club?
At the club, yeah. Yeah. When Beverly and I weren't hugging each other to stay warm at Dealey Plaza, does your husband know about that, Beverly? Beverly told me that she saw Ruby and Ferry together at the club about 2-3 weeks before, right, Beverly? And I believe Beverly. So anyway, back to Sherman and Ferry. So she's found in her bedroom. No question about the cause of death. She's been brutally stabbed, and somebody set the damn place on fire. It wasn't enough to stab her, I think, 17 times. And took her wallet and car found 7 blocks away, stab wounds into the heart, in the lungs, and everywhere. These are the autopsy findings: perforations of the heart, hemoperiton. This is, again, no question about the cause of death. Who did it? As far as I know, Ben, I think I'm right, nobody was ever found. Nobody was ever charged. Right? Unsolved. It's an unsolved murder. And by the way, I'm reminded of the same. I want to thank my son Ben, who's here with me tonight, director of the Wecht Institute of Forensic Science at Duquesne University, for putting this all together for me. Ben, thank you very much. You did a great job. Now, so she had these burns all over the body and so on. I don't know. I mean, there's no question about the cause of death. Who did it? What was her relationship to Ferry? And the one thing I don't understand is it here or where did I see it? That Ferry was supposed to have been working with her on developing some kind of an anti-cancer vaccine or so on. That's what she's supposedly working on. It was a very secretive kind of endeavor that was being done at various medical facilities in the country, Oxford Foundation Clinic being one of them. So I've never understood, where did Ferry come into this? What kind of a medical scientific background did he have that he would have been working with Mary Sherman? I don't understand that, and don't have time to get into that. but I wanted to include it. She's one of the people that comes up from some of the Warren Commission critic researchers whose theories reach out like a giant octopus with tentacles covering every single death. Although, was it the London Times that did the actuarial study? Jim, who knows? I think it's something like 23 deaths in 18 months or something like that of top people, and they came out to be tens of millions or hundreds of millions to 1 odds that those people, given those age groups and the causes of those deaths, would have died in that period. So who knows? So there's the cause of death. And what are the theories? Here's what I was referring to. Haslam, who wrote the book, and she was working on that research operation, a secret vaccine, and that there was a second lab working on this project run by David Ferry.
You're not going to give me a saying about it,
Ochsner was active in Louisiana politics, close to Representative Hebert, with whom we shared an ultra right wing. Oh, I'm sorry. Right wing, hardline, anti-communist sentiments, and friendship with Hale Boggs, who was a member of the Warren Commission, right? Who I think never really bought the Warren Commission, but along with Senator Russell, reluctantly went along with LBJ squeezing their arms and their shoulders. And I'm going to wrap it up with two that are not really deaths. Well, one is a death and the next one is not a death. I did this autopsy with the medical examiner of Tennessee for Ray's brother. I went down there and did the autopsy, and he died of natural causes. You know that background, and we don't have time to get into that, but another total bullshit story. And just like Oswald and just like Sirhan, James Earl Ray, an incredible story. And nothing fits there either, but I'll just stick with what I'm doing here tonight. I just added him because while he was not murdered by anybody, while there's no question about the cause of death, by having been incarcerated for the rest of his life, he was assassinated also, right? It's a form of assassination, and that's why I added him. And then, likewise, I added Sirhan, who is still alive, but he's been assassinated. Sirhan did not shoot the fatal shot. Look it up, look up the autopsy report. I've been doing this with audiences, and now probably over 100,000 people for the last 55 years. What was the distance from Sirhan's gun to Robert Kennedy as he walked through the Ambassador Hotel kitchen, having won the Democratic primary in California? 6 feet, 8 feet, 4 feet, whatever. We're doing this. Yeah, the distance, 1 to 1.5 inches. Look it up. The autopsy report by Dr. Noguchi, signed off by several members of his staff, 3 or 4 USC professors, 3 military forensic pathologists, whom I suggested to Tom that he call and invite to be his observers when he called me 3 o'clock in the morning to try to get my thoughts on how they could keep the body of the senator from being taken from him as they had done with JFK in Dallas. And we have become good friends and remain good friends. Tom now 92 years old. Look, and I'm one of the 3 civilian forensic pathologists signed on there too. And this was double-checked with criminalistics using the same kind of gun, the .22 Ivor Johnson long, and it showed 1 to 1.5 inches is the distance. Signed off unequivocally, unhesitatingly, and unanimously by the whole bunch, probably a dozen people signed off on that, including military pathologists, one of whom, by the way, was Pierre Fink. Small world. Right? Small world. Pierre, by the way, I knew when I was in the Air Force and I met him at the AFIP. I never met Eugene Boswell, but I did meet Pierre Fink. and I remember sitting next to him at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences in February 1964, and sat down at a table for lunch. I had given my talk was 65. I gave my talk, and I said, Pierre, and we had a friendly relationship. I'd like to ask you a couple. And he said, with the most glum of faces, that he was not permitted to talk about it. He could not talk about it. I could see he was really in emotional anguish. He was a fine Swiss gentleman, very precise, like this, but in a friendly way, and fascinating. So we have Sirhan, and we know that the senator's son, Bobby Kennedy, visited Sirhan and came out and said that he doesn't believe that Sirhan was the culprit. Sirhan was there. Sirhan shot. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. We know that. But there was another shooter. And the bullet, by the way, enters slightly above and slightly behind the right ear and has a slightly forward trajectory. There's Bobby Kennedy in front. There's the distance, whether it's 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, whatever the hell it was, shooting, and he's not 1.5 inches with his gun behind Bobby Kennedy's ear. And he didn't have 14 bullets, 14 shots were fired. Carl Euchre, the strong maitre d', grabbed hold of Sirhan immediately, threw him to the ground. He did not have a chance to reload his gun and start shooting again, okay? But the other bullet holes in door frames and in the walls and ceilings were taken away and never examined, and on and on and on. So that's the story. That's the story. Take from it what you will. I'm not in a hurry, but I don't want to keep you guys either. But if anybody has a question or a comment or knows something about these cases, different from what I've stated or so on, I've given you, what the hard facts are. But please, yes, Jim, please.
Cyril,
You have a microphone?
on the Ray case, I'm sure you know this, that they would not let him leave the state to get a liver transplant. You're aware of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're right. He needed the liver transplant, Jim.
Right.
Jim Giagiano said they would not let him leave the state to get a liver transplant. Yes.
Right. Is this working? Okay. On the Ferry case, and I'm sure you're aware of this also, the autopsy report says that there's no bruises in his mouth. But you and Minyard both said that there were bruises in his mouth. Okay? You said it. It's in the book of the film. If you forgot it, I understand. Okay, but you said you looked at the autopsy photos and there were bruises. And Minyard, the coroner down there, I'm sure you know. Okay, he said the same thing. All right.
Well, thank you, Jim. No, I don't remember that, and I'm sorry I didn't. I wish I remembered that to discuss it with Minyard. We were good friends. In fact, I went down. I did 30 autopsies pro bono for Minyard and the Hurricane Katrina catastrophe. But thank you, Jim. I did not remember that. As I said, I don't close the door of the different possibilities. I can only go by the autopsy findings. Yes, Gary.
Well, I don't have any specific question for you, but one thing I did want to follow up on, which we've not thanked tonight, was Deborah Conway, whose organization we have taken over, and she's been running with for years. I don't know if Deborah's in the room, but Deborah is not in the room now. I'm sorry. It's very late to do that, but I want to honor the work that she's done in the past and the work she continues to do.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, sorry. Thank you, Gary. Yes, Gary, you're going to microphone to somebody then?
Running the mic here.
Yeah, I'm running the mic now.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. So Cyril, if let's assume that Mark Shaw is successful in getting Dr. Kilgallen's body exhumed, what could you? It's been in the ground for 50 years. Are there soft tissues left that you could actually find something?
Which body?
Dr. Kilgallen. Kilgallen, yeah.
No, I doubt it very much. I'm not encouraging Mark Shaw. It's his idea. No, in this particular case, no, you would not. I've done exhumation autopsies on people who have been dead that long and longer. It depends on what you're looking for, fractures or so on, tumors. I remember doing an autopsy on somebody who'd been dead for about 50 years because there's a law in America that anybody who ever worked in a factory where there was some nuclear material, any kind of tumor they can recover for. And we did, and so it depends what you're looking for.
Here, hello?
How common is the spread of cancer as seen in Jack Ruby as quickly?
Well, it varies greatly. We don't know how long it takes for a tumor to form. And metastases vary greatly from one case to another. I have no way of telling you, except I could say that the extent of the tumor and the extent of the metastases tell me that tumor had been around for months, if not years. It was not something of an acute nature.
Question back.
Regarding Dorothy Kilgallen, is it possible the lethal barbiturates were administered by force, with suppositories, which is being suspected about Marilyn Monroe?
About Marilyn Monroe. No suppositories were found in the case. That's, for those who don't know, that's one of the theories of Marilyn Monroe, that somebody I became friendly with, he was assistant DA in LA, John, I forget his first name, came up with. It is possible, but highly unlikely, to get that amount of suppository material inserted into the rectum, and then not to find any evidence of the suppository afterwards. And no injection sites were found on her, so there were no.
And one more question. Is it possible regarding Jack Ruby that cancer, because that's the whole thing with the theory about Ferry and Dr.
Sherman.
Is it possible that cancer could be injected into Ruby?
You can inject cancer cells and start a cancer. That is possible. However, this particular kind of cancer, I don't believe would be one that could form in that way, because bronchiolar means that it's arising from the inner lining, the mucosa of the airways. So I doubt that the cancer cells injected would, you could put cancer cells and they might develop in someone's liver, in the abdominal cavity or so on, but I don't believe you could produce a bronchiolar carcinoma like this. Okay, folks, thank you.
Question, wait, one more question back here.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. They were pancreatic cells that were found for Ruby's cancer, wasn't it, throughout his body? They were pancreatic cells of pancreatic origin, is that right?
That's what some person had identified. The kind of cancer, though, was an adenocarcinoma of the bronchus. The tumor had spread to the pancreas. So these were not pancreatic cells. But someone, your playwright has said that. In fact, I showed that on one of the slides.
Thank you.
Folks, again, in behalf of CAPA, I want to thank you all. You've been a tremendous audience, and I hope those of you will consider joining CAPA. Stay tuned, and certainly plan to attend our conference next year. And thank you all for attending and for staying. And again,
and one last thing, Tim Thompson, for those of you who know Tim Thompson's work, he's one of the idiots that got us going on this case in 1967, and he's still on the case now, and he has a book coming out next year. There are going to be some important new information in that book that is going to be part of what we're going to be discussing next year, and he will be here to discuss that. I wish I could do that, but he tells me if I did, he'd have to kill me, so I won't. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cyril. Great presentation. Thank you.
So I Stitcher, and your contact information, I'm sure, is on there.
No.